that he, the Tsar, the ruler of the Christian Orthodox, had the right and the power to say whether a soul would go to heaven or hell. Now, I think that's just a philosophical error. But unfortunately, it was a very prevalent error which led to lots of torturing. And Ivan the Terrible massacred Russian people who didn't agree with him. And his black-coated secret service used to go around Russia, and if anybody was speaking out against the Tsar, you were killed off. And that entered the Russian mindset, and that's what Putin is doing. He is Ivan the Terrible reborn, if you want. I think it's all very sad and very tragic, and my solution is I've been to Moscow, I've given talks there in philosophy. I've been to the World Congress of Philosophy, which I met in Moscow in '93. In 1990, I was elected coordinator of Philosophers for Peace globally in Moscow with Russian philosophers. Back in those days, there was freedom of thought, freedom of speech. I met wonderful orthodox intellectuals and Marxist intellectuals and humanists and everything in between. There was freedom of thought. Those days, Putin has squashed. So I would like to see, and this is the good news about orthodoxy, there is also a profound grassroots tradition in Russian and Greek orthodoxy. There are people that try to be faithful to Christ's actual teachings, that have actually read the Bible, and try to live it. I've met Russian Orthodox people and who've actually read the Good Samaritan story that I shared earlier, and know that that is not a recipe to torture people that don't agree with you to death, or imprison them, or in Putin's case, attack a neighbouring country and make 8 million women and children have to flee their homes because you're bombing them. I mean, this is what the Antichrist does. And Orthodoxy understands there are forces of evil, just as Christ was crucified. So there are forces trying to subvert the message still. And so, we're in that existential life and death struggle, just as we were back in the day. But there are Christians who who still carry that light, I think, within the Orthodox Church. I mean, Tolstoy is one of them. There were Doukhobors who he supported. The Old Believers was a tradition of authentic Orthodox Christians who didn't agree with what the Tsar was doing in the name of the church. And they said, no, let's go off and just do our thing in the woods and be real people, tell the truth, So, okay, having said which, Russia also has produced amazing scholars. The people I met, the intellectuals of Russia, Russia's produced some incredible Sumerian experts. I just want to say this. In the University of St. Petersburg in Moscow, where I visited, scholars in Russia are highly educated. And although communism did some terrible things, and it was a time of darkness for many people, especially under Stalin, under Gorbachev and the later people, there was a bit of hope that it could become a social democrat nation like Germany or France or Britain, and as it used to be, and it could have become a decent, law-abiding, highly sophisticated culture, Russia. I still believe it could. I still think Putinism is an aberration and will be seen off. I'm still in touch with my Russian philosophical friends, who are much, much more intelligent than that narrow-minded sort of orthodoxy concept. And some of them in Russian academia are some of the world's great experts on the Sumerian traditions. And they're working on translating the original language. So I put my hope in the real intellectuals of Russia, which Putin has tried to silence. He's tried to say, if you speak out against the war, you get 15 years in prison. But I don't think he will win. It's a spiritual battle. I think the Russians are very, very brave people. I think one of them just won in the Hollywood Oscars took place 2 days ago, there was a documentary film made about Navalny, who's the leading intellectual dissident against Putin. They won the top documentary of the year award and got an Oscar for it. And his wife, I think, was there. You know, the Russians are very brave. When I was in Moscow, I met some of them. I met the guy that was running the Green Party in Russia then. I don't know what's happened to him now. He's probably arrested and stuck in prison. But I do have faith that they will come out of this and emerge once again into the light as a brave, free, and unbelievably intelligent nation. This is just, it's like kind of what Hitler did to Germany. Nazism wasn't real Germany. That was a fake thing that was put about. Just as Putinism is not real Russia, it's a fake, racist, nationalist aberration of the authentic soul of Russia. And I've studied Russian philosophy. When I was at university, I set up a Russian philosophy club, and people like Berdyaev, who came to France and taught. Those are the real intellectual heroes of Russia. Putin is just an ex-KGB thug, you know. Anyway, that's something about the links here. It's complex, isn't it?
Sure is.
Sorry about that. Let's do just one more, shall we?
All right.
Because they're quite long and deep, these.
Yes, all of them.
Let's have one with Islam. We'll have a green one.
Yes.
For Islam, because we're looking mainly at the Middle East here. Yeah.
Perfect. I was just about to pick one.
Okay.
So. All right. Let's do. Okay. 82.
Yeah. 82. Okay. Ishmaeli. Okay, that's fun.
And 4.
Oh wow, Egyptian. Wow. Okay. Thank you. That's really interesting. Well. So the Egyptian one first, because it's the oldest, and I'll stick with that idea. You know, I've talked before about how interesting ancient Egyptian religion is, and it has this really complex pantheon of deities, male and female. I've just had my tarot of gods. The last couple of days has been Geb, the earth god, who is portrayed in hieroglyphs with a goose on his head. You know, they're fascinating. And also Bes, this god of revelry and parties, who turns out to have given his name to Ibiza. And the Phoenicians loved Egyptian wisdom, actually. The Egyptians were the first sages, apart from the Sumerians, we've talked about them. The Egyptians were the other early civilization in the Middle East, and they had more temples per square mile of land than any other country on the earth. They were deeply religious, the Egyptians. For them, there wasn't a split between religion and philosophy. We used to sort of, religion, that's something you do in church. We don't do that. No, we do philosophy and science. That's how kind of modern Europeans think. But in Egyptian times, it was all the same thing. You know, you did your temple rituals, you did your prayers to the gods and so on. But then in the back room, you learned your hieroglyphs and did your deep study of science and mathematics and architecture and medicine and law. All the kind of intellectual disciplines that we now take for granted were invented either by the Egyptians or the Sumerians. And with Egypt, we're fortunate we've got all the texts. We've recovered quite a lot of them. Inspired by Egyptologists who've gone to Egypt and translated the ancient hieroglyphs into French and English and modern languages. And it was a French guy, Champollion, who was a Freemason, and inspired by the Napoleonic visit to Egypt, that he was able to work out what the hieroglyphs actually mean, which is an amazing feat. So we know quite a lot about them, and we've got papyruses that have come down that about medicine and also about magic, their magic spells and stuff. It's a fascinating world. Their word for the gods was the netters. So the gods are called netters. There are gods of everything. And really what they mean by the netters is like the spiritual quantum field which manifests as fire or water or space or stars or men or women or a cat. The netter is the etheric energy behind the form which takes that form. And therefore by doing a prayer to the netter of the cat or whatever, you're saying thank you to all the cats in the world at once. This is kind of what Plato, who spent time studying in Egypt, meant when he talked about the ideas behind manifest reality, of the ideas of things, and that's what the philosopher learns to see. Well, that's what the Egyptian priests were doing. They were learning to see the spiritual reality behind the physical forms, and then to work with those spiritual entities, gods, goddesses, to create harmony on earth. Our duty is, we're like little droplets of God energy. We're little letters in human form. And our duty is to ensure that all the other little letters that are here, human and animal, are having a good time. I mean, this really is a big party we're having. This is called the God Show performance, you know. And we as philosophers, which means healers, should be ensuring that everyone is, you know, having a good life as much as possible. And doing that by realizing that spirituality, prayer, knowledge, gnosis, wisdom, enlightenment is much more fun and exciting than destruction, killing, murder, torture, barbarism, you know, and wrong thinking. So, and Egypt inspired the greatest of the Greek philosophers, Pythagoras and Plato. And so what we call Greek philosophy is really like Egyptian deep wisdom that was then, you know, packaged and formatted in a way that the Greeks and the Europeans would understand. They're also responsible, I think, for a lot of Freemasonry, which was a sort of Ptah tradition. The Egyptians were great builders. They had great respect for Ptah, who's the chief architect of the universe. And so they quite like their ritual, just as Freemasons do. They like to go to their lodge and dress up in the right clothes and have, you know, exactly the right words said by the particular officer at the right time. It's very ritualistic. Well, so was Egyptian religion, you know. Fine, do your rituals. I don't have a problem with that, as long as you understand why you're doing them, you know. So that's the Egyptian tradition, which is profound and deep and lives on. And I've estimated maybe there's 100,000 people that still look to ancient Egypt as the fountainhead of wisdom. It was the most important African religion. There's a lot of modern Africans that say, let's go back to ancient Egypt, they had the wisdom. And I joined a thing called the Fellowship of Isis in the 1980s, founded by a friend of mine, who was a Christian minister of the Church of Ireland, Reverend Durden Robertson. I went to see him at his castle in Ireland and was initiated into the Fellowship of Isis. So I'm technically a priest within the Fellowship of Isis. I love Isis. She was the great goddess of Egypt. And I wrote him like a 10-page letter saying, I'm joining the Fellowship of Isis, but I don't want to you know, I want to stay open to all the other traditions. I'm not going to, you know, I'm open to all the other traditions, Sufism, Buddhism, Christianity, you know. I was already compiling my periodic table of the world's religions. And what I realized with the Isis tradition is that's what the Egyptians were doing. They were aware of that universality and comprehensiveness of approach, which is where I come from. Many years later, I went to America and I had a past life regression. And I was told, it came up in the past life regression, that I had been an Egyptian priest in a former life, a scholar priest, you know. So it sort of totally fit. that was like a confirmation of what I'd sort of sensed from early on, which is why I joined the ISIS fellowship. Okay, so that's the Egyptian thing. And it gave birth also to theosophy, which I've talked about before in the esoteric section of the table. It was a man called Ammonius Saccas, an Egyptian intellectual pagan, who coined the word theosophy in Greek, meaning divine wisdom. Because what the Egyptians wanted was not just human wisdom, although that's amazing, and yes, let's have it all, more of it. But let's try and channel and bring down the divine wisdom from the gods. Let's try and listen in to what they're doing as like spies on behalf of humanity. You know, I'd love to listen into the gods and see how they plan to stop the war on Ukraine by Putin. You know, what are they? I mean, you know, so to be a spy on behalf of humanity and listen into the gods' counsel, that's kind of what theosophy tries to do. It says that we can pick up on the divine wisdom and then use it to help heal mankind. Right. That's what Ammonius Saccas was saying, and I totally subscribe to that. You know, I'm a theosophist as well. So, how does that relate to Islam? Right. And specifically Ishmaeli Islam. It's a really interesting story. Islam was born in the Arabian desert around Mecca and Medina, which is not that far from Egypt geographically. It's just across the Red Sea. You know, it's a few days' travel. And people around Mecca and when Muhammad was being brought up, they knew all about Egypt. You know, they loved it. And in fact, they were really proud of the fact that their tribe, the Quraysh, of which Muhammad was a proud member, were descendants of Hagar, who was the Egyptian princess who married Abraham, who was the great prophet in the Bible that, you know, everyone loved, Abraham, Father Abraham, and whose other offspring had given rise to the Jewish people. The Arabs of the Quraysh around Mecca, in which Muhammad lived, really believed that they were literally descendants from Hagar. And Hagar's son, who was called Ishmael, was their direct ancestor. So when Muhammad was a boy growing up, he was taught all this stuff. And they memorized the family tree almost. Because Abraham lived about 1700 BC, which isn't that long ago. And oral tradition has a very long memory. So I think Muhammad just felt a sort of Egyptian, like a love for Egypt in his soul. And he wanted to get back to the purest form of worship, which he thought people had forgotten and neglected. So, the Quran started coming through, and I've talked about this before. I mean, here's my copy of the study Quran. I've done this is a brilliant Quran. If there's one edition, you get this one. With a great team of people. Mine is like 10 times the size, a commentary on the Quran. And I've gone into great detail about this. So, you know, please listen to my commentary on the Quran. The Ishmaeli brand of Islam is one of the most esoteric, in that they're really up for the most ancient wisdom traditions of, say, Egypt or Sumeria or wherever, coming through the Islamic currents. They say that Muhammad wasn't a sort of thug who'd come to silence everybody, like a sort of crazed meta-orthodox priest that was going to kill all the rebels. He was actually an extremely learned man, had a very pure heart, very, very honest and honourable man, who just had been the recipient of some very profound downloads of higher wisdom, which are in the Quran. And if you read the Quran properly with that light, you're eavesdropping on a conversation between God and Muhammad's higher nature. Say, call upon God, or call upon the compassionate. Whichever you call upon, to him belong the most beautiful names. I just hope to open at random at that. That's one of the most famous verses in the Quran for the Ishmaelis, because esoteric Islam says that yes, Allah is the name of God, but Allah has 99 names. And I have a poster upstairs in my study of the 99 names of God, which are things like justice, mercy, kindness, truth, compassion, all the kind of good qualities that we would want from God. You know, if I said, invent the best possible God you can possibly imagine, creative, disciplined, just, you know, they're all in the 99 names. So that is the key, the window to the universality of Islam. So people that come along and say, well, no, Islam is about doing your 5 daily prayers, and you can shave the moustache but grow a beard, and you've got to do that. And if you're a woman, you've got to wear a veil, and you've got to do blah, blah, blah. All that isn't in the Quran. None of that's in the Quran. None of that was in Muhammad. The actual Quran, the actual Muhammad text, is about liberating us from the imprisonment of false beliefs and false desires and false everything. It's one person who had a breakthrough enlightenment sequence of experiences which he channeled and downloaded as surahs, which is a text for all humanity. You know, it's a mandate for all philosophers to get really wise, and if you read it properly. And that's what I've tried to do in my commentary on it. I've tried to unlock so that philosophers anywhere on the planet, whatever their religion, can get the gold from the text, right? Now that's exactly what the Ishmaelis have been doing. I've met some senior Ishmaelis. There's a Centre for Ishmaeli Studies in London. I've had connections with it, and you know, they are some of the most intelligent and universalistic and I mean, they will love the periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. It could only have been invented by someone with the universality of the Ishmaelis, and you know, I've got a book that was printed by the Philosophical Academy of Tehran back in the days of the Shah, on the deep origins of Ishmaeli studies or Ishmaeli wisdom, and it developed in Persia, in the Shia branch of Islam, and spread. But it was inspired and influenced by even further east, so it has many Buddhist traces in it. Ishmaeli sages went and talked to Buddhist monks who were developing Mahayana Buddhism at the time. And they got on very well. You know, someone like the Dalai Lama and the Aga Khan, who's the head of the Ishmaelis, they probably met several times, but they would have a great, you know, a party of ideas. They would love each other because they're both coming from the same place of universal tolerance and compassion. They also both believe in reincarnation. So the Ishmaelis, as an esoteric tradition within Islam, also believe in reincarnation. So they say that Muhammad and Ali, who was his top helper, his lieutenant, they kind of reincarnate on the planet whenever mankind's really in trouble. As does Christ, as did Buddha, as does Mahavira, as did Krishna. All the great sages of mankind keep coming back until we finally graduate. It's like we're a big university of souls here. We won't get off the planet until we pass the graduation exams. You know, not that one wants to leave the planet, but it'd be fun to visit other planets, you know. But we can't do that till we all get past the graduation tests. So the teachers keep coming back. And they say, well, you know, what would be the point of having a university if all the teachers leave after a couple of weeks teaching? and the students are left like don't know how to read the books, don't even know like which end of the Bible do I start with. So you know, so that's why the teachers keep coming back, saying the Ishmaelis. It's a lovely thought, you know. I mean, that's why I set up the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum. I'm saying, well, let's join the council. Let's get all the teachers on the planet to work together as one. Let's have a conference with the Aga Khan and the Dalai Lama and the Pope, and, you know, all the others in Jerusalem, and let's open the Golden Gate, which is the symbolic thing that happens when the Messiah comes. What I've said is let's embody the collective Messiah within all of us. Let's accept, you know, everyone's Messiah quality, and therefore open the Golden Gate collectively, which is in the eastern wall of the city of Jerusalem, the old city, which would usher in an age of peace and enlightenment. So I'm saying let's do that, guys. You know, let's not wait around for this Messiah coming, because that just causes trouble, and it's been shut for 500 years. And I think the Ishmaelis would be up for that. They'll come, no problem. As would the great Buddhists and you know, the wisdom people would, from all traditions. And I'm very happy I'll come in at the very end as the Archdruid and the Peace Druids of Europe. You know, I'm saying, because the Druids and the Ishmaelis and the Egyptians, we go back to the same common ultimate root, I would say. You know, in the Celtic world, 2000, 3000 BC. I mean, we were around building Stonehenge when the Egyptians were putting up their pyramids. And we would visit each other and stuff. So we're brothers. And the Ishmaelis, I have great honour for them all, and for all the Muslims. But I think of all of them, they're quintessentially some of them the wisest. And their texts and so on are amazing. So yeah, so what's not to love is what I would say. I think I'm also right in saying that the greatest university in the Islamic world is called the Al-Azhar University, it means the brilliance. It's in Cairo. I've not been there in this life. And it was founded by a dynasty, the Fatimid dynasty, which were inspired by the Ishmaeli tradition. They ruled Egypt for a few hundred years and managed to found that university. And it's still going, and it's still like the most important university in the Islamic world. And my teacher in Islam, Dr Zaki Badawi, who was a great academic and a scholar and a wonderful human being in London, he was a friend of Prince Charles as well, who's now King Charles. Zaki Badawi and I had great conversations about all this stuff. He'd totally understand what I'm saying here and agree and say, yeah, that's the point of Islam, Thomas. He was a graduate of the Al-Azhar University himself. He was Egyptian, you know. So so the tradition lives on, and we need to get the table out into every school, college, university in Egypt and Persia and America and France, you know. I've had an offer actually from my French friend, Jan, to translate it into French, which would be good, because then we could get the table out into French schools and universities. And so anyway, there we are. That's my little final offering for today.
Thank you very much.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to finish with this is a Tibetan bell, just to finish and say we've had a great philosophy club tonight. Thank you so much for coming, and to all the other beings in the room who are not showing themselves visibly, thank you so much for coming. See you next week.